In the vast and powerful kingdom of Persia, under the rule of the mighty King Xerxes, the Jewish people lived as exiles. They had been scattered from their homeland many years before but had built new lives within the sprawling empire that stretched from India to Ethiopia. Their days were spent in cities and villages across the land, with a large community residing in the magnificent capital city of Susa. They held on to their traditions and their faith, a small nation living within a much larger one. The story of their greatest trial and most profound deliverance begins here, amidst the splendor and opulence of the Persian court, a place of immense power and unpredictable dangers. King Xerxes, a man who delighted in displaying his immense wealth and authority, decided to hold a celebration unlike any other. For 180 days he hosted a grand banquet for all his nobles, princes, and military leaders. He showcased the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty. Following this extravagant affair, he held another feast, this one lasting for 7 days, for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least. The royal palace was adorned with white and blue linen hangings, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and pillars of marble, a true spectacle of royal grandeur. On the 7th day of this magnificent feast, the king's heart was merry with wine. In his state of drunken pride, he had what he thought was a brilliant idea. He commanded his 7 chamberlains to bring his wife, Queen Vashti, before him and his guests. He wanted her to wear her royal crown so that he could display her great beauty to all the people and the officials, for she was lovely to look at. The king believed that his queen was another of his possessions, a beautiful treasure to be paraded for the admiration of others, a testament to his own good fortune and power in the world. But Queen Vashti, a woman of dignity and strength, refused the king's command. She would not allow herself to be made a spectacle for the entertainment of the king's drunken court. Her refusal sent shockwaves through the palace. King Xerxes was furious, his face burned with rage at this public defiance. His advisors, worried that Vashti's act of independence would inspire other women in the kingdom to disobey their husbands, counseled the king to act decisively. They suggested that he should depose Vashti, removing her from her position as queen forever and issuing a royal decree so that her actions could never be repeated by any other wife in Persia. With Queen Vashti deposed and banished from his presence, King Xerxes soon felt the loneliness of his position. His advisors, ever eager to please him and maintain stability in the court, proposed a solution. They suggested a grand search throughout all the provinces of his kingdom. Let the king appoint officials in every province to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the citadel of Susa, into the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women. The young woman who pleased the king the most would then be chosen to become the new queen in place of Vashti. This idea pleased the king greatly, and he commanded that it should be done immediately. Living in the citadel of Susa was a young Jewish woman named Hadassah, which means myrtle tree. She was also known by her Persian name Esther. She was an orphan, for both her father and mother had died when she was just a little girl. She had been lovingly raised by her older cousin, a kind and righteous man named Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. Esther was exceptionally beautiful, with a gentle and gracious spirit that shone from within. When the king's command was proclaimed and many young women were being brought to Susa, Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to the care of Haggai, the keeper of the women. Following the wise counsel of her cousin Mordecai, Esther did not reveal her Jewish heritage or her family background. Mordecai had instructed her to keep this a secret, understanding the precarious position of their people within the Persian Empire. In the palace, Esther's grace and humility quickly won the favor of Haggai. He showed her special kindness, providing her with the best beauty treatments, special food, and assigning 7 choice maids to attend to her from the king's palace. He even moved her and her attendants into the best part of the house of the women, seeing a special quality in her that set her apart from all the others. For 12 months, Esther and the other young women underwent a period of preparation and beautification as required by the royal regulations. They were given treatments with oil of myrrh and sweet spices and all the things for the purification of women. When her turn finally came to go before King Xerxes, Esther asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, suggested. Her modesty and natural beauty captivated the king more than all the other women. He found her more lovely and gracious than any of the other virgins, and without hesitation, he placed the royal crown upon her head and made her his queen in place of Vashti.
Perfect.
Mordecai, Esther's devoted cousin, held a minor official position that allowed him to sit at the king's gate. This vantage point gave him access to the daily comings and goings of the palace and the many conversations that took place there. Every day, he would walk back and forth in front of the court of the women's house to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Even after she became queen, he remained her steadfast guardian, a quiet protector watching over her from a distance. His heart was filled with both pride for her new position and a constant concern for her safety in the treacherous environment of the royal court. One day, as Mordecai was sitting at his post by the king's gate, his sharp ears overheard a sinister conversation. Two of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, who were guards of the doorway, were speaking in hushed, angry tones. They were resentful of King Xerxes and were plotting to assassinate him. Mordecai understood the gravity of their words immediately. The life of the king was in grave danger, and the stability of the entire empire was at risk. Without a moment's hesitation, he knew he had to act swiftly and discreetly to thwart their treacherous plan and protect the king from harm. Mordecai quickly found a way to get a message to Queen Esther, informing her of the terrible plot he had uncovered. He trusted her to handle the sensitive information with wisdom and care. Esther, demonstrating her own loyalty and good judgment, immediately went to King Xerxes. She reported the conspiracy to him, making sure to give full credit to her cousin Mordecai for discovering the threat. She explained how he had overheard the two guards and had acted out of a deep sense of duty to the throne. Her clear and honest report ensured that the king understood the source of the warning. The king ordered an immediate investigation into the matter. The claims were found to be true. Bigthan and Teresh were indeed guilty of treason. The two conspirators were arrested and swiftly executed for their crime, hanged on a gallows as a public warning to any others who might harbor similar thoughts. The entire event, including Mordecai's crucial role in saving the king's life, was carefully recorded in the Book of the Chronicles, the official royal annals, in the presence of the king. For the moment, Mordecai's good deed was noted but not rewarded, a fact that would later prove to be of monumental importance. Sometime after these events, King Xerxes decided to promote one of his officials, a man named Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. The king elevated him to a position of great power, setting his seat above all the other princes who were with him. Haman became the second most powerful man in the entire Persian Empire, second only to the king himself. He was a man consumed by pride and an insatiable hunger for honor and respect. He reveled in his new status, expecting every person in the kingdom to acknowledge his supreme authority and bow down before him as he passed. Following the king's command, all the royal servants who were at the king's gate would bow down and pay homage to Haman whenever he entered or left the palace. It was a sign of respect for his high office, an order given by the king himself. However, one man refused to follow this command. Mordecai the Jew would not kneel or bow down before Haman. As a faithful Jew, Mordecai believed that he should only bow and worship to his God, not to any man, no matter how powerful. His refusal was not born of disrespect for the king's authority, but from a deep-seated religious conviction that he could not compromise. At first Haman may not have noticed, but the other royal officials at the gate certainly did. They questioned Mordecai daily, asking, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" But he would not listen to them. He simply told them that he was a Jew. Seeing that they could not change his mind, the officials reported Mordecai's defiance to Haman, wanting to see if Mordecai's resolve would hold firm under the powerful man's furious gaze. When Haman saw for himself that Mordecai did not bow down to him, he was filled with an uncontrollable rage. His pride was deeply wounded by this one man's quiet refusal. Haman's fury was so immense that he thought it was beneath him to punish only Mordecai. His hatred, fueled by his wounded pride, grew to encompass all of Mordecai's people. Having learned that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman conceived a horrific and vengeful plan. He decided he would not just destroy one man, he would annihilate the entire Jewish population throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. He began to plot the complete and utter destruction of every Jewish man, woman, and child, seeking to erase them from the face of the earth simply because one man had refused to bow to him. To determine the most auspicious day for his wicked plan, Haman turned to superstition. He commanded that a lot, known as a pur in the Persian language, be cast before him for each day and each month of the year. The lot ultimately fell on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. With a date now set for his genocidal scheme, Haman approached King Xerxes to secure the royal authority he needed to carry it out. He presented his case with cunning and deceit, carefully crafting his words to manipulate the king and turn him against the Jewish people. Haman spoke to the king, saying, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so it is not in the king's profit to tolerate them." He painted the Jews as a disloyal and troublesome group, a threat to the unity and stability of the Persian Empire. To make his proposal even more appealing, Haman offered to pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasuries to cover the expenses of this extermination, a vast sum of money that highlighted his supposed devotion to the king's interests. King Xerxes, easily swayed by Haman's persuasive words and the promise of immense wealth, did not question the matter further. He took his signet ring, the symbol of his absolute authority, from his hand and gave it to Haman, the enemy of the Jews. "The money and the people are yours," the king declared carelessly, "to do with them as you see fit." With the king's ring in his possession, Haman now had the power to issue any decree and seal it with the undeniable authority of the throne. He wasted no time in putting his evil plan into motion. Letters were immediately written and dispatched by couriers to all the king's provinces. The decree, sealed with the king's signet ring, commanded the people to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the month of Adar. The decree also granted the people permission to plunder all their goods. As the king and Haman sat down to drink, celebrating their wicked agreement, the city of Susa was thrown into confusion and terror. The news spread like a dark cloud, bringing deep mourning and despair to the Jewish communities throughout the empire. When Mordecai learned of the terrible decree, his heart was just shattered. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, the traditional signs of deep grief and mourning, and went out into the middle of the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. He could not enter the king's gate, for no one was allowed to pass through it wearing sackcloth. His public display of sorrow was mirrored in every province where the king's edict had arrived. There was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes, their worlds turned upside down by the sudden and honestly incomprehensible threat of total annihilation. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai's state, the queen was deeply distressed. She did not yet know the reason for his grief. She sent fresh clothes for him to wear so he could come to her, but he refused to take them. His sorrow was just too profound to be covered by fine garments. Confused and alarmed, Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her. She instructed him to go to Mordecai and find out what was troubling him and why he was acting in this way. She needed to understand the cause of this great sorrow. Hathach went to Mordecai in the city square and returned to Esther with the horrifying news. Mordecai told him everything that had happened, including the exact amount of silver Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hathach a copy of the written decree that had been issued in Susa, so that Esther could see the terrible words for herself. Mordecai's message was urgent and clear. Esther must go into the king's presence to beg for mercy and to plead with him for the lives of her people. Esther received the message with a heavy heart, for she knew the immense danger of Mordecai's request. She sent Hathach back with a reply, reminding him of the unchangeable law of the palace. Anyone who approached the king in the inner court without being summoned was to be put to death. The only exception was if the king extended his golden scepter, sparing that person's life. "And I," she added, "have not been called to see the king for 30 days. But Mordecai sent back a final powerful warning. "Do not think that because you are in the king's house you alone of all the Jews will escape, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Mordecai's powerful words struck Esther's heart. She understood the weight of her destiny and the responsibility that lay upon her shoulders. The fear for her own life was eclipsed by the terrifying fate that awaited her entire people. She realized that her position as queen was not a coincidence, it was a divine placement for this exact moment of crisis. With newfound resolve, she sent her final message back to Mordecai. She instructed him to gather all the Jews who were in Susa and to fast for her. They were not to eat or drink for 3 days and 3 nights. She and her maids would fast as well. Her decision was made. At the end of the 3 days of fasting and prayer, she would go to the king, even though it was against the law. She accepted the potentially fatal consequences of her actions, declaring with profound courage and faith, "If I perish, I perish." Her words were not of despair, but of complete surrender to a higher purpose. She was willing to sacrifice her own life for the chance to save her people. Mordecai went away and did everything just as Esther had commanded him, uniting the Jewish community in Susa in a shared act of prayer and hope for their queen's success. On the third day, after the period of fasting had concluded, Esther put on her most beautiful royal robes. She went and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, directly in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, his heart was moved. She found favor in his sight, and instead of anger, he felt affection. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. In a gesture of grace and acceptance, he spared her life. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. The king then spoke to her gently. "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, even to the half of my kingdom." He was ready to grant her any wish, so captivated was he by her beauty and her bravery. But Esther, with great wisdom and patience, did not reveal her true purpose immediately. Instead, she made a simple, calculated request. "If it pleases the king," she said, "let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for them." Her strategy was to carefully set the stage for her ultimate plea, drawing her enemy into a situation of her own design. Haman was overjoyed. He had been invited to an exclusive banquet with the king and queen, a sign of his unparalleled status and favor. He left the palace that day with a happy and glad heart, but his joy quickly turned to bitter rage when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate. Once again, Mordecai did not stand up or show any sign of fear or respect for him. Fuming, Haman went home and gathered his friends and his wife Zeresh. He boasted to them about his immense riches, his many sons, and all the ways the king had promoted him above everyone else. He then bragged, "What is more, Queen Esther invited no one but me to accompany the king to the banquet she prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her, along with the king." Yet, he confessed, all this honor and glory meant nothing to him as long as he had to see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. His wife Zeresh and all his friends offered a cruel suggestion. Have a pole set up reaching a height of 50 cubits, they advised, and in the morning speak to the king that Mordecai may be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. The advice pleased Haman, and he had the enormous gallows built immediately. That very night, an extraordinary thing happened. The king could not sleep. Restless, he commanded that the book of the records of the Chronicles, the official royal history, be brought and read to him. As the scribe read through the annals of his reign, he came to the passage that described the plot of Bigthan and Teresh, the two chamberlains who had conspired to assassinate the king. The record clearly stated that it was Mordecai the Jew who had uncovered the plot and saved the king's life. The king interrupted the reading. "What honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" His servants replied, "Nothing has been done for him." Just at that moment, Haman entered the outer court of the palace. He had come early to ask the king for permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared. Before Haman could speak, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman, his heart swelling with pride, thought to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" He therefore suggested a lavish ceremony. Let the man be dressed in the king's own royal robe, placed on the king's own horse, and led through the city square by one of the king's most noble princes, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." To Haman's utter shock and humiliation, the king commanded, "Go at once, get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew." Humbled and horrified, Haman had no choice but to obey the king's command. He took the royal robe and the horse, found Mordecai, and led him in a parade of honor through the city streets. Afterwards, Haman rushed home, his head covered in shame and grief. But there was no time to mourn his humiliation, as he had to hurry to the second banquet that Queen Esther had prepared. At this feast, as the wine was being served, the king once again asked Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be fulfilled." This time Esther was ready. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, "Let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated." The king was stunned. "Who is he, and where is he? Who would dare to do such a thing?" he demanded. Esther looked directly at the man seated beside them and declared, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Terror seized Haman as he sat before the king and queen. The king, in a fury, rose and went into the palace garden. When he returned, Haman was falling on Esther's couch, begging for his life. The king ordered Haman to be seized, and he was taken away and executed on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. The king gave Haman's estate to Queen Esther and gave his signet ring to Mordecai, who was appointed to Haman's high position. However, the original decree against the Jews could not be revoked. So the king authorized Esther and Mordecai to write a new decree in the king's name and seal it with his ring. This new edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy any armed force that might attack them on the 13th day of Adar. When that day came, the Jews defended themselves successfully against their enemies. In Susa, they rested and celebrated on the 15th of the month. To commemorate this miraculous deliverance, Mordecai established an annual festival. He declared that the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar should be celebrated every year by all Jewish people. They were to be days of feasting and joy, a time for sending gifts of food to one another and giving presents to the poor. The festival was named Purim, after the word Pur, the lot that Haman had cast to choose the day of their destruction. The story of Queen Esther stands as an eternal lesson of courage in the face of fear, the power of faith, and the profound truth that one person, acting with bravery and conviction, can change the course of history and bring salvation to their people.